embarked on this year and set the stage for you all as well on the conversations we're going to have tonight. I just looked out here and I feel like I have to say hi to my friend, Dr. Adriana Bergen, who has just been named the new CEO of 9 Forward. So, hello, Dr. Bergen. All right, over the course of the past few months, we have broken bread and we have broken down the phrases in the Pledge of Allegiance. We started back in October with One Nation Under God, where we explored faith, values, and civic identity. In January, we challenged the idea of being indivisible and thought about unity in the face of a very divided country. In April, we discussed liberty and justice. We considered the freedom to pursue liberty and justice and what barriers might exist in this pursuit. And tonight, we arrive at the final two words: for all. These are two simple words, but they carry the weight of our collective aspirations. This nation, with all its complexity and imperfection, belongs to all of us. So what does for all really mean? What does it look like in practice? Well, these two words challenge us to look around our community and to ask honestly, who is included? Who still feels left out? What would it take for everyone to feel like they truly belong? I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it was inspired recently by an essay from Eboo Patel, the founder of Interfaith America. And in his essay, he reminds us that diversity in and of itself isn't the goal. Diversity simply is. It's a fact of American life. The real challenge is what we do with that diversity. Do we divide into tribes? Or do we build bridges? Do we compete for power or collaborate with shared purpose? So to help frame the conversation tonight, I want to offer a metaphor. For many years, we've described American diversity as a melting pot, a place where differences are blended together to become one American community. Sameness. But tonight I want you to imagine a potluck. At a potluck, each person brings something distinct to the table. The table doesn't ask us to abandon our flavors, our family recipes, or our stories. It invites us to share them. And everyone eats better when there's more dishes at the table. This is the promise of pluralism. The idea that our differences are not threats to be erased, but contributions to be celebrated and coordinated. And yet so often, conversations about race, identity, equity, they fall into this zero-sum thinking, the belief that if one group gains, another must lose, that there's only so much space at the table. But that's not how potlucks or pluralism work. Pluralism says you don't have to be like me for us to build something together. It says we can disagree deeply and still belong equally. So as Eboo Patel writes, the real work isn't just about naming injustice or celebrating identity, it's really about building together, forming bridges between communities and contributing to a common life where everyone can thrive. Not sameness, but solidarity. Tonight, let's reflect on what it means to move from diversity to belonging and to ask ourselves, how do we build a Jacksonville that truly lives up to the words for all? How do we create a bigger table where everyone brings something and everyone has a seat? As always, our goal is not to debate, but to understand, to really listen deeply, to speak honestly, to imagine boldly together. We'll start with a panel conversation. I'm so excited to hear from our guests. We'll talk about some ground rules and laying the foundation for creating gracious space in this room tonight. And then we're going to turn it over to you. You all will engage in conversation. You'll have about 45 minutes to talk about the questions that are in the packets at your tables, and then we'll do a little debrief. So that's what's in store for you tonight. Thank you for being on this journey with us, and I'm going to turn it over to President Delaney.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Nice preface. You come to a potluck at my house, you can leave the vegetables though, because I won't eat them. So the first question to kind of kick it off, when you hear the phrase "for all" in the Pledge of Allegiance, to what extent does this resonate with your lived experiences and the community members that you serve? I'm going to start with Dr. Jameson. One of my close friends, I'm actually the executor of his will, grew up in Columbus, Georgia. He's African American, and he told me once that as he grew up, he didn't view the flag as representing him because of just the way that he was forced to grow up with the discrimination in the South. So what does "for all" mean to you? To what extent does that resonate you and your experience? And that, of course, the board that you serve on as well.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I don't think we can look at "for all" in a contemporary, static snapshot in time, right? I think there's a historical context associated with "for all," particularly as it relates to my lived experience. W.E.B. Du Bois coined the term double consciousness, and he talks about this incessant struggle that Black folk have between their African and their American. So when Rudy walks into a room, he has to understand when to be the thermometer and when to be the thermostat. He has to be, socially perceptive enough to understand how to take the temperature and behaviorally flexible enough to make the necessary adjustments, right? All people don't have to travel that metaphorical distance that I have to travel in order to be included in "for all." So I think "for all" for me is as yet. I think it's a journey, not a destination. I think it's possible, but I think we have a lot of work to do.
Francisco, first, why don't you take 20 seconds and describe Jasmine, and then we'll just kick the question over to you. Does "for all," how does that resonate with your own lived experiences and that, of course, of the organization that you run?
Sure, thank you. We provide an affirming space so that they can become their authentic selves and hopefully see a future where they can thrive that's unlimited. And so that's what we do at Jasmine. It's really important, especially in these days. And for me, the "for all" statement, what resonates with me is it's "for all unless ... you are LGBTQIA, or you are a woman, or you are Black, or you are Jewish." We talked about this the other day, and it feels like it's very segregated and as far as what the "for all" means and who it's for. My own lived experience, I just remember I grew up in Ohio and going to a high-end department store and noticeably being followed because I guess I looked like I didn't belong, and being followed by the security officer really made me feel like I didn't belong. And so that was only, well, a long time ago, but it seems like yesterday. But that's what "for all" feels like to me.
Let me ask you this question, and I'm going to go back to Rudy as well before I get to Miriam and Mara. Is it any better than 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago?
I think in some cases it is, but it also feels that, especially like in the LGBTQI plus community, you go 5 steps forward and then you go 3 steps back. And so, the part of the "for all" that it answers, it's how it's affecting the people that we serve, the community that we serve. And we have teens and young adults that are feeling attacked simply for being who they are. And for them, it doesn't feel any better, it feels worse. Mm-hmm. They're losing safe spaces in schools. They're losing the ability to get the gender-affirming care that they need. Parents are losing that ability to support their kids to become who they are. So for me and for the people we serve, it feels like we've gone back 30 years.
Mixed report card. Okay. Rudy, you? Is it better?
I think it's absolutely better. There wasn't a Jasmine back then, right? And now there is. Although there are forces that are attempting to dismantle the protections, that an organization like Jasmine provides. I think it's more people who believe in this experiment we call democracy than not, right? And I feel like in this republic that we live in, not only do we have an opportunity, but we have a responsibility to make it better.
Maura, what about you? Should be on, yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, so to answer this question, I always like to speak about the multiple identities that I bring to the table. And just to mention one, like asking this question about the Pledge of Allegiance as somebody who became a naturalized citizen 2 years ago has a totally different dimension. So I am an immigrant. English is my second language. I have lived in Jacksonville for 20 years. And there is still the struggle of trying to find the place. I didn't know, and I used to joke and tell my friends the first time I came to the US, I didn't know that I was Latina or Hispanic. I was just like, no, I'm Colombian. What do you mean I'm Latina? Oh no, here you're Latina. What does it mean? So I think it's, one day having a conversation with one of my Black female friends, she said, there's not a day that I can wake up and say, I'm just gonna show up in the world today as a woman, right? So there's impossibility of that. So I feel like for all should be more an understanding of the intersectionalities, because we don't rarely fit in just one box, right? Like, I'm Latina, but I'm immigrant, and I grew up in poverty, and English is my second language. So, and Francisco and I have Latino origins. I don't even know, like, I prefer the word Latina, right? Instead of Hispanic. And the discussion right now about, oh, it's Latina, and there's a discussion, I'm like, well, maybe for the young Latinos, because for the old people like me, I'm good with being Latina or Hispanic, right? Like, the Latina doesn't work. So I really feel like that's the struggle of this country, right? Like, I have been a very engaged person in Jacksonville before I became a citizen. Of course, becoming a citizen is like the right to vote, and I find myself, I just came back from Colombia, and this will be shocking for many of my friends to say, I am carrying my passport card even when I am in the States. And my reflection, and I'm really struggling with this, is I didn't have to leave because of persecution, but I survived a civil war in Colombia. And I never thought I would live in fear in this country. And right now, in my job, I don't drive in the state of Florida. Because of course, not only I'm Latina, I'm Colombian, and my two presidents got into a fight. So I was just like, great, where do I go now? So this idea of all, I really don't feel it right now. Like, being an immigrant right now is sort of like the way it was, it continues to be being a Jew, right? Being a Muslim, being a Black person. So for me, this idea of all always invites, what are the multiple identities? Because I can be welcome in some space because I have a doctorate. That opens some doors. But there will be doors that will never open for me, just because I have an accent. Which, by the way, everyone has an accent, even native speakers. So that's just to put the gist. It's like the concept of intersectionalities, right? And also the understanding that we are more than the trauma that we have experienced, right? So I still get the question of people, so what about the drugs in Colombia? And I always say, I don't know. Because we produce it, we don't consume it. So I feel like this is in this, sorry. I'm very colorful in case you haven't noticed. So it's this whole thing of, how do we ask these questions to say, who is all? Who gets to be invited? With Rudy, we have had this conversation about being at the table, being in the room. And I'm like, yeah, you can be in the room and be in the outside part of the room. But my question, and I have devoted my life in my work in the boards that I serve, is how do we create a space where we truly recognize people's agency, right? That is not, I check this box, you are LGBTQ, as if that's the only thing that you are. So when we showed up, when I'm Latina, and don't even talk about being documented or not, but we don't talk about body abilities, right? how even gets harder if you are Black and disabled, and if you're LGBTQ. So just in a jest, I feel like the all is very aspirational, but in a way it could be attempting to erase the uniqueness that we bring.
Thank you. Miriam, we'll go to you. The same, again, we're sticking with the same question. The for all, which is the topic of tonight, how does that manifest itself for you personally and also the organization you're on?
First of all, Myra, I have to say, be careful about what you wish for, because if we had this conversation 4 years ago when I got here, I think my answer would be very different than what it is tonight. So for years, after World War II, the Jewish community, which by the way, for people that don't understand, this is not a religion, it's a peoplehood. It's very different. We look different, we act different, but culturally and so forth. Doors opened up. People were embarrassed by what happened in World War II, and all of a sudden universities opened their doors, cultural environments, you name it. We got accepted, we got on boards, and we thought, this is great. So that's how I was raised. I wasn't born, as much as I feel old, I wasn't born at the end of World War II. I was born after, so I grew up kind of feeling pretty comfortable and pretty complacent until probably about 4 years ago. That's when I say that you think you're accepted, but you're not. So the for all has changed. Now it's really scary when you have over 90% of Jewish students on college campuses in the United States who've said that they have witnessed or been part of some form of anti-Semitic or Jew hatred. The fact that 2 nights ago, people were they were bombed, they were literally caught on fire. Only 10 days before that, a young couple gunned down because of who they are. We live our days and our lives totally afraid and feeling isolated and alone. Because I will tell you that, we do as a Jewish community, there's a phrase that says tikkun olam, repair the world. Not repair the Jewish world, repair the world. So we bring our chairs, whether we're invited or not, we bring our folding chairs and we sit at tables to end hate. And not many people have accepted my invitation to the potluck dinner at my house. And that's how it feels. So right now, it doesn't feel very much like for all.
We talked before you came here 4 years ago. What happened about then? Can you point to something that seemed to trigger this increase from 4 years ago?
Well, for those of you who know Richard Szyszewski, I'm going to quote him. He said it's because I got here, but that's not really what happened. About 4 years ago, we started to really see another uptick of anti-Semitism. I think we got used to the quiet, under-the-table forms of Jew hatred. But when when Kanye, whatever you want to call him, started his rants, and we started seeing banners put over sheets, put over the interception, was that the overhead at Emerson? When you see the, after the Georgia Florida game, and then you see projections on buildings downtown. And, that's not a really for all welcome feeling of saying that, Jews don't belong here. So I think starting 4 years ago, and certainly in the last 20 months, we've seen an increase. There is definitely a veil of Jew hatred that's being used, saying it's all about Israel and what's going on in the Middle East, when in fact, what we're seeing on college campuses, what we're seeing of people who are afraid to wear anything that would just, the fact that we have to have security, a community security director, and that we have to have security at our synagogues, and not to control traffic. Like I pass the mega churches by my house, and they have, thank goodness, they have the police out there for traffic. Says something that it is scary to say that you're Jewish and to stand up and say you're Jewish and to live Jewishly And so that's what we're doing. But it doesn't, like again, I go back, I think it just all started, it was just the timing was right, and this was about 4 years ago.
I was a history major, and I grew up in a suburb outside of Cincinnati that had a large Jewish population to it. I've just never understood anti-Semitism. It's like, what is the root of that? Where does that come from?
There's a great book that I'm going to suggest for anybody, because I don't understand it either, and it goes, I'm not a history major. I literally love to raise money. That's what I love doing. So if I could do that for anything I believe in.
Don't be bothered if I don't return your phone calls.
Most people don't. That's why, but seriously, like, this is not my space that I've been thrown into. And history and politics were not things that I loved to do. But there's a book by Noah Tishby, and it's Difficult Conversations with a Jew. And it talks about the history. This goes all the way back to biblical time, like all the way back, about how Jews were presented by authorities that came in and took over, never in a good light. And I have to say, it's really hard when people say, and I'm not trying to pick on you, like, it's hard to understand. Yeah, we don't get it either. And to some degree, it's like we don't need the hugs as much as we really need people to stand up and say enough is enough for everyone. And what's happened, and we talked about this Friday, is that each group, each marginalized group, has really been pinned against each other in a really brilliant way by using words and language that takes one group and triggers them against another group. And so instead of all of us who are being hated upon coming together and saying, how do we, like Elizabeth said, how do we bring a potluck and all not say that our hate is worse than yours, but to recognize the hate you're going through, and in moments like what we're going through right now, which is the highest form of hate in the country that they're seeing right now, is truly at the Jewish community, not to have to to companionize it with and, or but. And that's really what we need, that we're looking for.
Yeah, it came to focus to me, the Rwanda massacre, where the Hutus and the Tutsis, and there was a dehumanization process that went on, which is exactly what Hitler did in World War II, was to dehumanize the Jews at the time. And let me move on to the next question, and I'll go with you, Francisco. The kind of a parallel of what I asked earlier. Do you think society is becoming more or less accepting of the different identities? You kind of had a mixed answer to it before a mixed grade, so to speak. And are there signs of, I guess there's signs of both progress and backlash. Why don't you talk about those?
Sure. I think that what I'm starting to see is that communities are starting to come together, and we kind of talked about this as well, right? And it's not to talk about who has the worst situation, but just to say that we all are in a bad situation, and that is just wrong. And we need to stand together. We need to come together as a community. And I'm starting to see that happen. So it's kind of one of the things I've always liked to kind of live by is that in crisis creates community. And I kind of feel that that's what's starting to happen. And, I just came to Jacksonville, and I started in November, but I moved to Jacksonville in January. But I had accepted the position in October prior to the election, and so I was expecting a tough state environment. I wasn't expecting a tough state and federal. So kind of like you were saying, like, I wasn't prepared for this. And I think like with everything that's rapid fire in January and February, people were just running, I think, and nobody really knew what to do. And I kind of feel like now we're at a point where we are starting to reach out to each other and how can we come together? How can we reduce, if there's reduced funding, how do we work together to make sure that these programs still exist? And I'm starting to see that now. So I do feel hopeful, And I think that in these times of crisis, we will come out stronger. So I don't know if that still answers your question. I think it's like both.
Why don't we talk about Jasmine for a second? Again, I know you've only been here 6 months or so. That breakfast used to be held at UNF when I was there, and then it ended up outgrowing it. So isn't that a sign of sort of support of the particular cause that you're representing?
Yeah. And that's why I love my answer is always mixed, right? Because the community itself has been amazing. We had our Strides for Pride in April, and we reached our pre-COVID numbers. We had over 1,400 people come in and run at our 5K, so it was a great sense of community. So in that aspect, it's amazing. I see lots of good things. But then you come to the office and you're having these phone calls with your grant administrators, or finding out that your grant funding is getting cut and that you can't provide services like you used to, or you can't see certain things anymore. And so it's kind of like that mixed bag of good and bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure, I completely understand it. We were chatting beforehand at UNF. We started an LGBT center, and that's gone now because of the state laws. Yeah. Rudy, what about you? Do you see society becoming more or less accepting? What signs of the progress or the backlash?
I think it's easy to see society moving backwards, getting worse. However, for me, like when I walk around my neighborhood or I'm sitting on my front porch, and I live out east, right? Like my neighbors aren't being affected by federal funding being cut. They're not being affected by no DE&I programming or anti-Semitism. They're living their lives in poverty like they've always lived their lives. They're surviving, right? So they're not aware of the socio-political climate that we're living in. But I do think that there is an undercurrent of frustration building up that's going to swing this pendulum the other way. There are a few people in power that are making these decisions, but I think, our democracy is strong enough to withstand and resist the powers of inequity.
Yeah, I often say America in the end gets it right. It just takes a while. Churchill said Americans get it right after they've exhausted every other possible option. So maybe that's where we are, and I do hope and I do predict the pendulum will swing back. That's kind of the nature of the country. So, Dr. Martello, you?
Yeah, I reflect on the fact that, polarization is a money-making business. And I feel like I was telling my family, it's like, it's so fun, I'm 52. I was so lucky to be born before the internet. Like, I do know what life was before. And then I truly believe that we are in a radical transformation moment for the world. So just sharing, Colombia supposedly signed a peace agreement 5 years ago. Ask me if the war has stopped. No, it hasn't. Because what happens is, I feel like these categories that we have are so binary that there is little space to say, oh, wait a second, there is a lot of things in between, right? I feel like when the war in Gaza restarted after October 7th, and I like to share this experience, my across the board neighbor across the street, she's Jewish. And I was posting a couple of things, and she was like getting in the social media. And I called her and I said, this is what we are not gonna do. We are not gonna have this discussion in social media. I refuse to do it. Let's have a conversation, but let's agree, what are the rules of engagement? I am not trying to convince you of anything. And I truly respect your experience. And that shifted everything. Because it's not that she changed or I changed. It's sort of like the conversation of like, where did you find that information? And that has shifted the dynamic, right? Because I wasn't trying to tell her, you are wrong and I'm right. Last time I checked, nobody's willing to let me be here, you throw stones at me. Nobody wants that. What I have learned as a Colombian living in Jacksonville for 20 years is that the secret sauce is in my African American community. when I go to the north side or when I go to any of the groups, like, my sister Tia is here, it's like, the kids that are at home, what are you talking about? That the budget, the reconciliation budget? I mean, I consider myself a highly educated person, and I learned about the reconciliation budget last year because now I work trying to protect Medicaid. And I was just like, wait, what? You mean to tell me this is gonna happen before the president gets inaugurated? Yes, that was news to me. And I get paid to pay attention to these things. So I love when Rudy says, like, people are trying. I wish that they were living their lives. I think people are struggling to live their lives. So where is a world where we can say, Miriam, I really feel your pain. I really feel it in my body. I told you this. And I also feel the pain of the many people who are being killed in Colombia, in Sudan. It's not a competition, right? It's the humanity of seeing, where is the nuance though, right? Rudy has a doctorate in education. I'm sure there are places that people's like, are you here to serve me? I've been pet in Jacksonville. In fundraising events with people say, you're such a cute little thing. I'm like, okay, ready to be pet. This, I'm talking about 5 years ago. So where are we? I think it's a mix of things, but I'm always inspired in the fact that I never met Mariam before or Francisca, and then after the conversation, she said, I want you to come to this training, right? I feel like, and of course, I'm a Colombian, so I'm an eternal hopeful. I just don't give up. And I think the solution is, how do we really open the space for the nuance, the difference, the unique experiences, right? Like I used to work, President Delaney, at the Jacksonville Public Education Fund. And I always said oh my gosh, I felt like all kids had a 2-household parent, home. And I'm like, how many of those kids? That's not true whatsoever. And it has not been true for a long time. So I feel like it's always like, okay, what can I do not to have this polarizing? Because, that's the algorithm makes money out of that. So I force myself as hard as it is, because I'm a trained journalist, to look for all the different perspectives, even if I disagree. I think that's something that we're deeply missing because we just want to talk to people who think like me. And that makes life really boring. It's comforting because you don't have to sort of defend yourself. Like I said, in my personal life, I don't want to have to defend my humanity every single day. Because as a Latina immigrant in this country, I have to do that every single day.
Thanks. Miriam, we talked a little bit about this on the last question, but progress, backlash. Can you do a yin and a yang?
I wish. It's still raw. It's not even 48 hours after the last attack on a Jewish community. So I feel very much of feeling like I'm back in the 1930s. And that's really scary for our community, and trying to model the fact of we're resilient, we're strong, we're embedded in this country, we're embedded in Jacksonville, and let's just keep living our lives and keep doing what we're doing, and the pendulum will hopefully turn. I can say that, but it's not how I'm feeling every night when I try to lay my head down to go to sleep. And I agree that I think that breaking bread and having conversations with people different is really the first start. And I always say this, with a number of people I've said this, that I've met since October 7th. When I sit down and the first thing they want to talk about is Israel, no thank you. Because I believe we'll agree to disagree. So instead what I'd like to talk about is what's happening in Jacksonville that we both are concerned about. Poverty, access to health, making everyone feel safe, feel part of Jacksonville. And when I say safe, I mean for all. And let's start having that conversation instead of looking at things where we might disagree until we build a relationship of trust where we can have those challenging conversations that go a little deeper. And so I'm hopeful for that. This is a great start. I'd love to see others in this. I was just talking to Wanda before we started, it's everyone that's here, you've already dipped your toe, you want this. And now if we can just take that rock and pebble and throw it a little bit out into the pond and get a circle deeper and a circle deeper, we can get there.
Well, take that into the next question then, which is, what do you find are the most pressing barriers, social, political, economic? What would you point to as, not a single most, but what would be barriers, those types, to getting this feeling of a quote for all?
I can only speak from my own experience. I can't speak
That's right.
for other communities. I think the biggest barrier is we really feel isolated. We're no man's land. We're privileged. You're the privileged. The Jews were the privileged, own everything, and now you're getting persecuted. Good luck. And so we're in this no man land, feeling very, very isolated and alone. So to me, that's the biggest barrier of not sitting down to really hear what our experiences are and what the truth is. And I agree with you, social media period. Let's just stop with media, and then you could add on social media, is not helping any of our situations at all. And again, that goes back to my first initial conversation about trigger words and so forth that are actually separating us instead of unifying us. And so for me, that's the biggest barrier, is going beyond just saying, I want to be your friend, but truly sitting down and having that relationship to start. Show it, don't just say it. Or at least say it. It's been pretty silent for the Jewish community from everyone else for the last 20 months.
Francisco.
I guess I'm just going to pick up on what Miriam has started on and touched on is actually social media and the media. I think that's a huge barrier, and kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier with Hitler dehumanizing Jewish people. And I think that's kind of where media and social media is doing, and it's allowing us to dehumanize people that we disagree with. And what it's doing is it's making it easier to find those that think like us so that we can find community in that, but then we don't have community anywhere else. And I think that we need to stop that. We need to start talking to our neighbors, talking to people in other parts of the community that don't live in the neighborhood that we're in. We need to know everybody in Jacksonville, every neighborhood in Jacksonville, and stop staying in our little oases and really kind of get out and get to being people again and get to being social.
Rudy?
Yeah, I think those three ecologies are interdependent of each other, but right now all three of them are being politicized, right? Speaking of the media would have you believe that Rudy Jameson is a black man, doesn't care about the immigrant population and pathways to legalization, or doesn't care about the Jewish community or the LGBTQ plus community. And I think what we are witnessing right now is this is demonstrative evidence that we can stand in solidarity together. And I know that for a fact. But all of the misinformation and disinformation that's being spread, we have to get through the noise. Each and every one of us in this room know exactly what we want for us and ours. We just have to want the exact same thing for the other, whoever the other is.
Mary, let me go back to you. You mentioned something earlier that I found intriguing about how groups are almost pitted against each other that are being negatively impacted by the larger society. Why don't you go back to that?
So I'll speak specifically about the Jewish community. There's a wonderful documentary, which is what Myra said. I invited the co-panelists to view in a special screening called October 8th. And it's about the rise of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism in America, and specifically in the college campuses after October 7th. And it's scary and brilliant that this not a marginalized community, not Palestinians living in Gaza, Hamas, jihad ideologists, got together, actually my hometown of Philadelphia, I'm really proud of that, in 1993, and there's a taped recording from the FBI about planning October 7th for October 8th in 1993. Specifically, one of the things that they were focusing on is what they could be doing in their ideology and in the way that they can infiltrate these high levels of education by specifically using words, genocide, tolerance, ethnic cleansing, rising up, and so forth, that would absolutely begin to break down the areas that we actually all, to be able to work together. And so when you saw that documentary, and I saw and heard what was happening, it was brilliant. And now that has been deep-rooted since 1993, deep-rooted in our society. And so that's when I talk about why we are, one of the barriers I believe in terms of working together is that we have been unconsciously and systematically really set up against each other.
Maura?
Well, there is even a term, like the Olympics of the oppressions or the oppressed, which again, I feel like that's, besides the brilliant comments that you all have made, I keep reflecting on, of course, one of my identities as a Colombian that I keep noticing is Americans. The political correctness in this country is keeping us away from making progress. Because it's a lot easier to just say, you know what, never mind, I'm not gonna talk to this person. That's easier. Like, it wasn't easy for me to have this conversation with my neighbor, who I love. Like, I take care of her girl, I pick her up from school. This is how close we have become since I moved to my house in Avondale. So, but it's this desire of like, and I have these conversations with the boards where I'm at, and that's not easy. It's like, why we go from, but let's be kind, which I'm not opposed to that. Like, I come from a country where we have killed 200,000 people in the last 60 years because of our inability to sit at the table. So, because I survived that, I also see the benefit of saying, this is difficult, but we can go through it, right? Let's find, and that's sort of the work that 904 does, let's have a conversation around race. But it's also how you invite people, right? Like, I'm not gonna come to your house, like, I'm exhausted. Who is exhausted? I try not to look in the media. I went to Colombia and I said to my family, I'm so exhausted with the news in the US, I cannot pay attention to what is happening in Colombia. I can't, because I live in the United States. So if you ask me, do you wanna come to talk about Lucy's? Oh, hell no. Invite me to a walk, invite me to a drink, because this is difficult. But I believe that if we see history, the movement, and Jacksonville has a lot to learn. I wish in Jacksonville we had the Jewish community closer to the Latino community, to the Black community. There are communities where that happens. Because it's not, this is something happened to immigrants. This is something happening to Jewish people. I have nothing to do with LGBTQ. So for me, that's sort of like, how do we think about who is not seated at this table and who can bring that multiple identity to this table?
I'm going to stop you there because it's a perfect kickoff to turning it back over to Elizabeth, then giving it out to the group that's in the audience. Thank you all very much tonight. I enjoyed it.